Hello and welcome to this short introduction to allow you to discover DISC. I'm going to start with a question. Wouldn't it be useful if everyone wore a badge saying, please deal with me in this way, this is my preference? Or you knew how to ask somebody to do something in a way which always received their cooperation, not resistance? Or you knew exactly how to adapt your communication in order to get your message heard? Hello, I'm Nikki Wild, and since 2009, my mission has been to de-stress directors and empower high-performing teams to play nicely together so that everyone's more effective, motivated, and happy in doing what they do. I grow people to grow businesses that are productive, positive, and profitable. I am a former finance director. I am still a qualified accountant, and various accreditations around coaching and mentoring, including my DISC certified specialism. I've been a DISC specialist for, well, since 2009, so over 13 years at the time of recording this for you. And DISC is my weapon of choice because whilst there are a whole bunch of profiling tools that inform us and give us useful insights, DISC is one which, for me, has the simplest concepts to understand, which means you can start using it and reconciling it right away. I am also a pianist, a singer, and a petrol head. I've been involved in motorsport all my life, and so if you want to have a complete segue conversation, get me talking about cars. But back to the point in hand, back to DISC. Extra question for you to think about. I'm going to invite you to just for a moment think of a time when you noticed someone else behaving or acting in a way and you thought, what on earth were they thinking? Why on earth would they do that? Or perhaps think of a time when you received a surprisingly emotional outburst or response from someone in response to something that you said. Or perhaps you can think of a time when you've worked with somebody that you would have labelled difficult to work with. All of these times that you've just brought to mind have an explanation in a DISC context. So what do we mean by DISC? DISC gives us great information about our behaviour preferences. If I was going to ask you to think of, to organise a party or a social gathering, in that split second, all of us have a preference for either the task or the people first. So either your brain went task and you started thinking about all the practical things, the what and the where and all of those sorts of things, or your brain went straight to the people first and started thinking about who do you want there, what sort of atmosphere do you want, and then you go on to the practicalities. So either one way or the other, which way did your brain go first? Did you go task then people, or people then task? And to some degree, all of us are either more outgoing or more reserved. This is different from introversion and extroversion for those of you who've perhaps completed something like a Myers-Briggs type indicator, for example. The outgoing nature within us, if we are outgoing, we will be demonstrating a lot. We'll be very much using things like sounding boards. We want to talk things through. We will display our thinking and our preferences for things, whereas those of us who are more reserved will process everything internally. We won't get to see what's going on for somebody if they're very reserved. So all of us, to some degree, more outgoing or more reserved. And those of us who are more outgoing will tend to be more active, proactive, will tend to look forward to the future and will tend to be more likely to take a risk. Whereas those of us who are more reserved are more likely to be more passive and more likely to look backwards at the past and for past experience and are much less likely to take a risk. So those four elements together, those four attributes, if you like, those four aspects, give us our DISC profile. D, I, S, and C relate to these four ingredients. And we all have all four ingredients, but we all have a unique recipe. We have different quantities of each one. So D, I, S, and C are the initial letters of these four ingredients: dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. So on the outgoing task side of things, we've got dominance. That's the part of us that is our natural leader. We want to, if we've got a lot of this in our mix, we want to step up, take charge. We want to be in that lead role. We'll be the trailblazers, storming ahead. And the focus here is about results, tangible results, getting the job done and getting it done now. Our priority is solutions. We thrive in a position of authority, and we want to challenge, and we want to challenge. So that'll be the dominance part of us. You might be recognizing that characteristic in yourself. Still on the outgoing side, if I flip over to the people side of things, this is our natural negotiator. This is the part of us that will look for a win-win solution. Our priority here is building connection. We want to get to know everybody. We want to be everyone's best friend. And we thrive on attention, adventure, and fun. If I move down now to the reserved side of things, back on the task side, the reserved part of us is compliance. And the compliance part of us, think of this as your inner perfectionist. This is the part of us that always wants to follow the rules. If there is no rule book, we will create one if we've got a lot of this in our mix. The priority here is do it the best way, do it the right way. So this part of us will do well and thrive in situations where there are procedures, where there is where we need a lot of logic and analysis, and where perfection is valued and important. So that part of us very much wants to sit in a world where there is structure and order. Contrasting the leader and the dominance and compliance, the dominance part of us wants to get the job done now. The compliance part of us wants to get it done right. So that's the difference between the on the task side of things, very simply. Do you want it done now, or do you want it done right? And then finally, back on the people side, the steadiness part of us is our natural collaborator. Here it's all about building relationships and team, working together, putting the needs of others first. This part of us likes things to be predictable and wants to maintain the status quo. We want things to stay as they are because that gives us a sense of security. This part of us is a very loyal attribute, very trustworthy and dependable. So this part of us will naturally collaborate and will naturally get to know people, friends, colleagues, and so on. So on the people side, if you're thinking the difference between influence and steadiness, influence is all about me. I love the attention and I will have a breadth of contacts, whereas the steadiness is about we. It's the collective, the team, and I will have depths of relationship, but far fewer of them. So that's the difference there. And I said in that first question, what to think of a time where you've had a surprisingly emotional outburst from someone in response to something that you said. And sometimes that is because our fear button has been pressed, and we will have different fear triggers depending on our mix from a disc point of view. So if I've got a high level of dominance in my ingredients, then my priority is get the job done. I want to win. I'm going to be very competitive, and it's all about getting the job done and solutions. So if you bring me something that is a threat to that success, I'm going to react to that because you've pressed my fear button. My fear is failure if I've got a lot of this ingredient. So of course I'm going to react if something is a threat to my winning and success. My influence part of me, because it's all about connection and building those contacts and being friends with everyone, my greatest fear here is rejection. So I'm going to be avoiding delivering bad news. I'm going to avoid situations where I might be unpopular. The steadiness part of us, which is all about building relationships and wanting to maintain the status quo and have that predictability, that greatest fear if I've got a lot of this ingredient is change, because change is uncertain and unsettling. So I'm likely to react or be very resistant to change. So if I've got a lot of this in the mix, I might be okay with predictable change or something that I have chosen, but even then that will feel unsettling. So we need to be aware of where is change a particular unsettling situation. Now, all of us as human beings, to some degree, prefer things that are familiar and will be naturally sort of cautious with something that's unfamiliar or uncertain or new. So to some degree, we will all resist change or be cautious about change. It's the steadiness profile that has this in abundance. So if we've got a lot of steadiness, then we will be very, very aware of this unsettling feeling when things change. And then finally, back in the task side of things, the compliance part of us, because this is all about the perfection and following rules and getting things done right, our greatest fear here is criticism, because we've done it as perfectly as we know how to. And if someone then spots a mistake, oh my goodness, that feels like the world has ended, because we tried to get it perfect and then somebody spotted a mistake we didn't. So again, you might well get a response that's perhaps quite or appears quite defensive, because somebody is giving the reasons why it wasn't perfect in order to understand it so that we can get it or improve it and get it right next time. But that can come across as defensive. So you can start to see where just that simple little overview can highlight different behavior characteristics depending on our mix of ingredients. You'll start to recognize some of those tendencies, some of those traits, and some of those fear buttons, perhaps in yourself, perhaps in some colleagues, perhaps in your family and friends. So what are the characteristics just from that little introduction that you started to spot for yourself? So the question is, of course, if we're starting to recognize this, how do we put DISC into use? Well, all of the profile characteristics have their strengths, and all of the profile characteristics have their areas for development. We are all a work in progress. We're all learning to use our strengths to our best ability, and to achieve our goals and aims. And at the same time, we are all learning through our experiences with others, where sometimes our characteristics might actually drive everyone else nuts. So maybe there are times where we want to dial some of it down, or perhaps turn up some of our characteristics. And being aware of that is really useful in social settings, in work settings, when we're building our professional relationships, and when we're getting the best out of those around us as well. So why do we adapt our style? Well, we adapt our style in order to build our relationships, to get along with each other, to improve our communication so that our message is heard. All of these characteristics have ways in which we can learn what the preferences are of those around us. If somebody thinks the same way as us, then we probably know what their preferences are. But if they have a very different profile mix, it might not be easy to think about, how do I want to adapt what I'm doing in order to fall into step with those around me in order to achieve this common aim. And so understanding DISC and having a DISC report not only gives you the insight into your own preferences, it also allows you to understand how you might adapt and get on better with those around you. So if you do want to understand a bit more about DISC, whether that is a DISC workshop, I run workshops with clients and with teams in organisations, so you're very welcome to get in touch about one of those. If you'd like to start for yourself, maybe you don't want to bring this to others' attention before you've looked at it for yourself first, you can get in touch, and if you want a DISC profile, we can put that in place for you. So if you're curious to know what your DISC profile actually is, then get in touch today and we can make that happen for you. Thank you very much for listening.